Let's embark on a fascinating thought experiment. What if we took two unique Southeast Asian nations, East Timor and Brunei, and magically swapped their locations? The consequences would be absolutely mind-blowing. Picture this. Brunei, that tiny but wealthy sultanate, suddenly finds itself at the eastern tip of the Indonesian archipelago, while East Timor is now nestled on the north coast of Borneo. This geographical shuffle would completely reshape not just these two nations, but the entire region's dynamics. Let's start with Brunei, currently sitting pretty with its vast oil wealth and strategic position in Borneo. Imagine it now in East Timor's location. Those rich oil fields they've relied on gone. Instead, they'd be dealing with much more modest resources and challenging terrain. The Sultan's palace would now overlook the Timor Sea rather than the South China Sea, and their relationships with Indonesia and Australia would become far more significant than their historical ties to Malaysia. But here's where it gets really interesting. Brunei's well-developed infrastructure and financial resources could potentially transform their new location into a major maritime hub. Their experience in managing wealth could help them develop new industries, perhaps turning their new position into an advantage for trade routes between Australia and Southeast Asia. Now let's flip to East Timor. Suddenly positioned in resource-rich Borneo, they'd inherit Brunei's oil fields. A dramatic reversal of fortune for one of Southeast Asia's youngest and poorest nations. But would this newfound wealth be a blessing or a curse? Remember, East Timor has already experienced the challenges of managing resources during their struggle for independence. The geopolitical implications would be fascinating. East Timor would now share borders with Malaysia and Indonesia in a completely different context. Their historical struggle for independence would have played out very differently in this location, potentially changing the entire course of Southeast Asian history. This swap would also affect regional politics. Malaysia would have a very different neighbor in East Timor instead of Brunei, while Indonesia would need to adjust to having Brunei as its immediate neighbor in the east. The power dynamics of ASEAN would shift, and maritime boundaries would need complete redrawing. The cultural impact would be equally profound. Brunei's Islamic influence would meet a different set of regional dynamics, while East Timor's predominantly Catholic population would find itself in a very different religious neighborhood. These cultural shifts would create fascinating new patterns of interaction and influence. In the end, this geographical thought experiment reveals just how much location matters in shaping a nation's destiny. It shows us that wealth, resources, and geopolitical relationships are deeply tied to where a country sits on the map, and how a simple change in location could rewrite the entire story of two very different nations.